I'll finish this first information ecosystems lecture by summarizing some of the important points and themes that emerge in this, granted, abbreviated and relatively superficial history of the evolution of information ecosystems in living organisms over the last 1.1 or 1.2 billion years. Overall, we see this tendency for increased survival and thriving corresponding to increases in the capacity of an organism's information ecosystem. And this manifests itself in a wide variety of ways. For example, increases in the reliability of a particular information source, that corresponds to increased thriving. And we see a nice manifestation of this in the evolution from simple biomechanical and biochemical mechanisms for sensing the environment to simple or primitive sense organs, and then finally to more refined sense organs combined with central nervous system processing or sensory systems overall. So our Golgina is only capable of detecting the general direction of light. Our magnetotactic bacteria wants to find oxygen-poor environments and avoid oxygen-rich environments, but it actually doesn't even sense oxygen. It only has this indirect way of finding those environments through its sensitivity to the Earth's magnetic field. Once we see those mechanisms being collected together into primitive sense organs, for instance, eye spots on something like the jellyfish, that increases the reliability of the detection of those parameters in the environment. For one thing, they group together multiple mechanisms within a single structure. And in the case of the jellyfish, those structures then get propagated around the entire circumference of the jellyfish. So now the jellyfish is able to detect light using multiple different detectors at multiple different places, and hence is much more reliable at locating light relative to it. Again, when we have this evolution with, for instance, the development of vertebrates from those primitive sense organs to more refined sense organs together with the central nervous processing system that processes that information, now that reliability of that information is increased significantly as well. Now there are mechanisms that help to mitigate the problems in the reliability that result from lower light levels. There are mechanisms for making more precise inferences from that information that's gathered by those light sensing cells to what sort of things are out there in the distal environment, and so on. This also illustrates how increasing amounts of information can result in increased thriving and survival rates for organisms. So that Golgina, it really has a relatively impoverished amount of information about the world. It only really knows the sort of general direction of light relative to it at any particular moment in time. And so its adaptive response to the environment is limited by the small amount of information that it can gather from the environment. But as we develop eye spots, well, not we, but as organisms develop eye spots, as they develop sensory systems, the amount of information about the distal visual environment becomes dramatically larger, so that by the time we get to creatures that have visual systems, they're now getting information about the distal environment across a wide array of the environment itself. So they have a visual field now. They have information about the sorts of things that are there. They are categorizing them: prey, predator. They are positioning them relative to each other in the three-dimensional space, and so on. So that's a dramatic increase in the amount of information. Those sorts of increases also increase the complexity of the information. So relationships between objects in the visual field, that's a much more complex thing than simply an object in the visual field. And these increases in both the amount and the complexity of information result in increased thriving for organisms. we also see increases in the range of information complexity in terms of the spatial dimensions from which information can be gathered. So there's an increase in the very size of a organism's information environment. And we see this nicely with the transition from individual sensory systems to sharing of information. And the example I believe we talk about in the text primarily is fish schooling, so that fish are now sharing information about what they see from their perspective in the school, so that a fish now monitors not just what it sees, but it also indirectly monitors its environment for instance, predators or food by the movements of the rest of the fish school, so that what happens on the other side of the school can now be conveyed to them through that propagation of reactions to it. When human beings evolve the ability to share information with spoken language, they're also now capable of conveying information, relatively complex information, from their long-term memories. So they're not just sharing information at this particular moment in time, but they're sharing information from other slices of their lives. And this can be collected together into oral histories or oral traditions that summarize the experiences of individuals across generations and pass from one generation to the next. And we even see this with other organisms that can teach their young how to do things. Particularly in the 20th and 21st century, we see a dramatic increase in the speed and really the ease with which information can be transmitted from one individual to another. So when you're living in the United States, or what will become the United States in, 1784, if you want to know what happened in Europe, you're going to have to wait till somebody travels over from Europe, and that'll take, months, and then they'll be able to tell you what had happened in Europe, but you won't find out until someone comes. And so the time it takes for information to travel from one location to another along trade routes is pretty slow. Same thing with the Silk Road. An idea and innovation like movable type printing can't travel any faster than the individuals who are trading goods communicate with each other across their very small individual steps along that Silk Road. Similarly, with the advent of something like movable typeface, we find that the ability to share information becomes much easier now, so that we're able to produce a large number of books with relatively smaller resources so that more people can have access to those books. All of those things also contribute to an increase in the number of individuals, and the number of individuals particularly who both contribute from and benefit from information sharing in human societies. So literacy rates start to increase dramatically, numerosity rates start to increase dramatically, so that more individuals are capable of participating in that storehouse of information. And the fact that there's more individuals is good, but the fact that they are diverse, that we're now gathering information from individuals in different cultures, in different parts of the world, at different time periods, right? The diversity of sources, of participants, and then ultimately of modalities, so that we share information in an auditory fashion, we share information in a written fashion, we share information in a video fashion, and so on. All of these things increase thriving by increasing ease of access, speed of transmission, the number of bits of information that are potentially entered into and communicated and taken out of an information ecosystem, the sheer size of the information environment, both spatially and temporally, the reliability of that information when it increases, and so on. And we'll leave things there, right, on this sort of positive note, and then we'll look at the potential difficulties that start to emerge, really the unwanted and unanticipated side effects of the tremendous success that human beings particularly have in creating information ecosystems as we start our next information ecosystems lecture.